Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be tackling something that's been creating a lot of buzz, the Canada Disability Benefit.
It's a CDB.
CDB, yeah, that's right. And a new benefit always brings up a lot of questions for people trying to figure out what it all means for them.
It can be overwhelming, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So, you've sent us articles about the CDB, some concerns from disability advocates, even official government documents. Looks like you want the full download here.
I do.
Okay, great. So we're going to talk about, what happens if this bill actually passes? Where's the money for the medical exam going to come from? And is everyone really going to get that $200 a month? Plus, all that fine print we always got to worry about.
Lots to cover. Maybe we should start with the bigger picture.
Yeah, what is this benefit all about?
So this isn't just some random standalone benefit, right? It's part of Canada's Disability Inclusion Action Plan. So it's meant to be a big deal, like a commitment to a more inclusive Canada overall.
That's exciting. And the good news is it's not just talk anymore, right? The Canada Disability Benefit Act, that already got royal assent back in June.
It did. Big step forward.
So it is happening.
Okay. Then I'm also seeing in these documents, the rules are still being worked out. It's not totally set in stone yet.
Yeah, the act itself is law, but how it actually works, the nitty-gritty, that's still being finalized. Which is good, actually. The government's asking for public feedback on the proposed regulations right now.
Oh, okay, that's good. So there's still time to maybe make some tweaks or something.
Exactly.
Okay, so before we get too deep into that, who even qualifies for this CDB? What's the checklist people need to be looking at?
So based on what we know right now, you got to be a resident of Canada for tax purposes, which I'm guessing most people listening probably are.
Probably, yeah.
You also need that disability tax credit, the DTC, active one of those.
Yeah.
And your taxes need to be up to date, obviously.
The DTC, that seems to be coming up a lot in everything you've sent. The Disability Alliance BC, the DABC, they seem particularly concerned about that part. Yeah, they have a point. It's make or break for the CDB.
Really?
Absolutely essential. The DTCs, how the government recognizes you as having a disability, one that impacts your ability to work.
Oh, okay.
And it can reduce your income tax burden, which is helpful, but without it, you can't even apply for the CDB.
I can see why they're worried then, yeah. Because they're pointing out all these hurdles to even getting the tax credit.
It's a process, for sure.
Not a simple one, it sounds like.
Not at all. A lot of people just don't even know it exists, the DTC. Then there's the application itself, 16 pages long, this big, intimidating form, the T2201.
Yikes. Not exactly a fun time.
Nope. And then on top of that, you've got to find a doctor who's willing to help with all this, which is hard enough with the family doctor shortage.
Right. Even if you find one, what if they're not familiar with the form or how to, assess for disability?
That's a big issue.
Yeah. And then doesn't it cost money to have them fill it out sometimes?
Yeah.
You got to pay the doctor on top of everything else.
Sadly, yeah. It can be a lot, hundreds of dollars.
That's crazy. It's like you're being penalized for.
For being disabled, pretty much.
Right. Exactly. Okay, so that all sounds super discouraging, but
Sure.
I did see in Budget 2024 there was funding to cover the form costs, right, for the medical part.
There was, which is great. Really positive development. But
Yeah.
the details are still fuzzy. We don't know how it's going to work or when it'll be available. Hopefully soon, though.
So in the meantime, what are people supposed to do? That's got to be stressful, not knowing.
Well, good news is DABC, they have a DTC medical fees fund to help right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's there for people who need it.
Okay, good to know.
Right.
We'll be sure to include their info in the show notes so people can find them.
Definitely a lifeline for a lot of folks.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I guess even with that help, the sooner you apply for the DTC, the better, right?
Absolutely. With potential wait times and this uncertainty around the funding, better to get the ball rolling ASAP.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's say you have the DTC, you're all set there. How do you actually apply for the CDB itself?
So it'll be a separate application. We don't have all the details yet on that, but you can bet it'll involve another form to fill out.
Another one.
Probably. But the government says they'll be giving more info as we get closer to that July 2025 launch date.
Okay, gotta love government forms, right?
Always a joy.
So, process stuff aside, the big question I bet everyone's wondering is that $200 a month guaranteed? Will everyone who qualifies get that?
Ah, that's $1 million question. And unfortunately, we don't have a clear-cut answer yet.
So, back to those regulations that are still being worked out.
Yep. The exact way they calculate the benefit amount, that's still in progress. We know $200 is like the target maximum,
Okay.
but your situation might mean you get less.
So, Time to dive into the fine print, which I'm sure is full of fun legal jargon.
Always.
Any big red flags people should be watching out for?
It can be daunting to decipher for sure. One thing to keep in mind is this thing called the benefit reduction rate.
Benefit reduction rate. Like they could just reduce your payment for no reason? What is that?
Not exactly no reason, but basically your CDB payments, they could be reduced if you have other income.
Oh.
The idea is to avoid someone getting more from the CDB than they were already getting from other programs, but how they calculate it is pretty complex.
So it's not as simple as, here's your $200.
Sadly, no. And this actually brings up another important thing. The CDB is designed to work with existing disability benefits, not replace them.
Like provincial and territorial ones.
Exactly. Those stay in place. CDB is meant to be an extra layer of federal top-up, basically. But that also means how much you get from the CDB could depend on what your province is already giving you.
Oh, okay, so now it's getting really complicated.
It is a complex system, for sure. Federal benefit trying to mesh with all these different provincial programs. No wonder people are confused.
No kidding. I'm starting to see why the DABC is so focused on pushing for changes to how this whole thing works.
Their perspective is super valuable. They work directly with people with disabilities, so they see what's at stake here.
I'm looking at their statement, the one about the 2024 federal budget. They make some good points.
Yeah.
Like, that $200 max might not be enough to actually lift people out of poverty.
Yeah, $200 a month, it helps, but it's not going to cover all the extra costs that come with living with a disability, right?
Exactly. Things like transportation, special equipment, medications, that stuff adds up fast.
It does, and it's often not fully covered by other programs. The DABC's argument is the benefit needs to be higher to really make a difference.
I can see that. And they seem worried about this two-tier system too, right? Like people getting different amounts depending on their province.
That's a big concern for them, that someone who's already getting decent provincial benefits might actually see their overall income go down once the CDB's factored in because of that reduction rate.
That seems kind of backwards, like almost punishing people for getting more help to begin with.
Yeah, it's a valid point. Shows how tricky this is, this whole interaction between federal and provincial support.
No kidding. Okay. Okay, so we've covered a lot of the nuts and bolts, who qualifies, how to apply those fine print things to watch out for, and we've touched on some of those bigger concerns from the DABC.
A lot to digest, for sure.
Yeah, but I can already tell this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely. Still a lot to unpack, especially about what the DABC wants to see changed and what all this means for people day to day.
Right, like the human side of all this.
Yeah.
We're talking policy, but we haven't talked about the people this actually affects.
Exactly, and that's what we'll get into next.
We will. Stay tuned for that.
Coming up after the break, we were just talking about how the CDB is supposed to work with those provincial and territorial programs, right? Not replace them.
Right, right.
And that brings up a really important question. Is this benefit truly available across Canada? Like, is it consistent everywhere?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. It'd be amazing if there was finally, like, equal support for people with disabilities no matter where they live in Canada.
Yeah. That's the goal, for sure. The CDB is designed to be national, available to anyone who meets those eligibility criteria, regardless of their province.
Okay, that's fantastic. So someone receiving disability benefits in, say, BC, they'd still be able to apply for the CDB on top of that.
Exactly. But here's where it gets tricky. Remember that benefit reduction rate we talked about?
The one where your CDB payments could be lower if you have other income already?
That's the one. And the way they calculate that reduction, it takes into account how much you're already getting from your province.
Wait, so if your province already gives you a decent amount of support, you might actually get less from the CDB. That seems kind of backwards.
It's definitely a point of contention. The government's argument is they don't want to discourage provinces from offering strong disability programs of their own, right?
Right.
But critics are worried it could create this two-tiered system where some people end up with less overall support just because of where they live.
That doesn't seem very fair. Like, it's penalizing people who are already getting more help, even if they still need the extra support.
It's a valid concern for sure, and it highlights just how complex this whole system is, right? We're talking federal benefit, trying to mesh with a patchwork of different provincial programs. It's no wonder people are confused.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm starting to understand why the DABC is so focused on advocating for changes and improvements to the CDB.
They're in the thick of it. They work directly with people with disabilities, so they really see how this plays out in real life.
And I'm looking at their position statement here, the one on the 2024 federal budget, and they make some strong points. Like that $200 maximum benefit, they're saying it's just not enough to actually lift people out of poverty.
Makes sense. I mean, $200 a month, it helps, sure, but it's not going to magically cover all those extra costs that come with a disability, right?
No, of course not. We were just talking about that, like
Yeah.
transportation, special equipment, medications.
It adds up so fast, and it's often not fully covered by other programs. So the DABC's argument is the benefit needs to be significantly higher to really make a meaningful difference in people's lives.
I can see that. And they also seem really worried about this potential two-tier system we were just talking about.
Yeah, that's a big one for them. They're concerned that people who are already receiving higher provincial benefits might actually see their overall income go down once the CDB is factored in because of that benefit reduction rate.
Oof. Yeah, that seems like a major oversight. It sounds like the government really needs to think carefully about how the CDB interacts with those provincial programs to make sure it's actually helping people, not making things worse.
Absolutely. And there's another important point they raise. The CDB, even if it's improved, it's just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Right.
It doesn't address all those root causes of poverty and exclusion that people with disabilities face, all those systemic
I
issues.
mean, like discrimination in employment, inaccessible housing, inadequate health care, all those things that make it harder to just live.
Exactly. The CDB can offer some financial relief, which is incredibly important, but it doesn't magically fix those bigger barriers that prevent people with disabilities from fully participating in society.
So they're basically saying, yes, this benefit is a step in the right direction, but don't stop there. Like we need bigger, more systemic change too.
That's a great way to put it. They're challenging the government to think beyond just financial support and really tackle those underlying issues that perpetuate inequality.
That's awesome. It's inspiring to see them using their platform to advocate for such important changes. I'm glad you included their perspective in the material you sent. It really adds a lot to our understanding of the CDB.
It's essential to hear those voices, the people who will actually be most affected by these policies.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the mechanics of the CDB, eligibility, the application process, potential pitfalls in the fine print, and we've explored some of the broader concerns raised by the DECC. But I think we need to bring this back to the human level.
For sure.
What does this benefit actually mean for people with disabilities in their everyday lives? What are their hopes, their fears, their experiences?
That's a great question, and it leads us to one of the most interesting parts of this whole deep dive.
So we've been talking about this huge policy shift, all these details, but
Yeah.
we haven't really talked about the people it's supposed to help, right? Like, what does the CDB actually mean for someone living with a disability in their day-to-day life?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, to be honest. For some people, someone who's really struggling to make ends meet, that extra $200 a month could be huge, like life-changing. Might mean being able to afford groceries and rent without that constant stress.
Yeah.
But for someone who's already getting more support, maybe from their province or something, it might not make as much of a
That's
difference.
like those tax credits sometimes, right? You
Yeah.
get a little bit back and you're like, was that it? Did that even help?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But even when it's not a ton of money, it's also about dignity and recognition, right? The fact that this benefit exists, that's a statement. It says that people with disabilities deserve financial security, just like anyone else. That's not nothing.
No, for sure not. Which reminds me, the DEBC, they're publishing something in their transition magazine soon, right?
Yeah.
About the human side of all this.
They are, yeah. They're gathering stories from people with disabilities about what the CDB could mean for them, what they're hoping for, what they're worried about.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it'll be really powerful, I think, to hear those firsthand perspective, to put a face to the policy.
Totally. It's so easy to get lost in the technical stuff, the numbers and the rules, and forget that behind all that, there are real people whose lives are going to be impacted by this.
Absolutely. Imagine someone who relies on public transit, right?
Yeah.
Because they can't drive. That CDB payment could mean the difference between being able to afford a bus pass every month or having to choose between getting to a doctor's appointment or buying groceries.
Or someone who needs a special piece of equipment to help them with daily tasks, but it's not covered by insurance. Suddenly, that CDB payment could make that equipment accessible to them.
Exactly. It could be the key to independence, a better quality of life. But then on the flip side, you also have people who are worried that the CDB will actually make their situation worse, not better.
Because of that benefit reduction thing.
Yeah, they're afraid they'll lose more from other programs than they gain from the CDB, leaving them with even less than they had before. It's a valid fear, and it's why the DBC is pushing so hard for clear regulations, fair ones, that actually protect people from unintended consequences.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about what the DABC would like to see changed, but realistically, how likely is it that the government will actually make those changes? I mean, the bill's already passed, right?
Yeah, that's true. But remember, they're still finalizing those regulations, and they've said they want public feedback. So this is the time to speak up, to make your voice heard. The more people share their concerns, push for improvements, the more pressure there is on the government to actually listen.
So what can people do besides, reading transition magazines, staying informed? It all feels so big sometimes. Like, where do you even start?
I get it, it can feel overwhelming, but there are concrete steps you can take. First, connect with organizations like the DABC. They're on the front lines of this. They can offer guidance, support, practical advice.
Yeah, because they deal with this stuff every day. They know how it all works.
Exactly. And they can connect you with opportunities to share your story, participate in consultations, advocate for change alongside other people. There's power in numbers, right?
Right, for sure. And even just talking about it, spreading awareness, that can make a difference too,
Yeah.
right? Like sharing information with friends and family, posting about it on social media.
Absolutely. The more people who understand the CDB, what it could do, what the potential problems are, the better equipped we are as a society to push for a system that truly supports people with disabilities.
Okay, great point. So before we wrap up, let's do a quick recap for our listeners just to make sure everyone's on the same page. What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into the CDB?
Okay, so big picture. The CDB is a significant step forward for working age Canadians with disabilities. It's about financial security, about recognizing that everyone deserves to live with dignity and have their basic needs met. But it's not perfect. Definitely not. There are still a lot of questions about how it's going to work in practice, especially those interactions with provincial programs that benefit reduction rate.
Right.
And it's important to remember the CDB on its own won't fix everything. We need to keep pushing for broader change, for a society that's truly inclusive and accessible in all areas of life.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the Canada Disability Benefit. It's been fascinating and honestly a bit overwhelming at times.
It has.
But it's so important to stay informed and engaged on these issues. And that's where timely trends and news comes in, right? We're here to break down these complex topics, bring in different viewpoints, and help you understand what it all means for you. So if you found this deep dive helpful, please do us a favor and like, share, subscribe to our channel. It really helps us reach more people and keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those questions coming.